I've spent the last couple of days analyzing the data from the last 10,000 DMs that we sent for our clients. So if you're curious to see what actually books calls versus what doesn't, then this video is for you. And real quick, if you don't know me, my name is George Nita. I'm the founder and CEO of DMsetting.com, where we generated over $50 million specifically from DM strategies for clients such as Jeremy Miner, Matt Gray, Dean Graziosi, the Onuha brothers, and many, many others. And what I did is I pulled the data from the last 10,000 DMs that our sellers sent across 20 different client accounts, and I've extracted the 3 biggest lessons that separate DMs that book calls from the ones that don't. Now let me show you the numbers before we dive into the actual lessons. So for total new conversations, we had a total of 9,234 new conversations. Now for follow-ups, we did a total of 47,505 individual follow-ups. Then from here, we proposed 2,062 calls. We sent 1,591 individual booking links. Out of those 1,157 calls booked, we were left with a total of 890 qualified calls booked. Now, so far, if you look at this and you compare the total amount of new conversations with the calls that we booked or the qualified calls that remained on the calendar after they went through our qualification process across all of those different client accounts, we have about a 12.5% booking rate on overall calls. And then we have about a 9.6% booking rate on actual qualified calls from the total amount of leads that came in. And if you've been watching some other videos on the channel, you know I always preach having a minimum of at least 10% lead to booked call ratio. So in this case, we crossed that with 12.5 and we're almost there on qualified calls. So we're right where we want to be. Now, out of those 890 qualified calls, we had a total of 766 that were scheduled on the closers calendars in this specific time frame. The rest of them are coming up in the future, so we don't have data on those just yet. So 766 scheduled on the closers calendars. Then we had 540 that were taken. That gives us a 70.5% show rate here, which is pretty good. Then we had a total of 140 deals closed. So this gives us a 25.9, almost 26% close rate, which is also pretty solid considering this is an aggregate across a bunch of different accounts. And this is where it gets really interesting. So I'm going to use another color here to write all this out. So out of those 140 deals, we had a total revenue of $1,234,611 USD, out of which our actual cash collected, upfront cash collected, was just over 1 million at 1,293 US dollars. Our revenue to cash ratio in this case is 81% on upfront cash collection, which is very solid if you were to ask me. And then 2 really cool metrics that I always look at is cash per booked call. So in this case, our cash per booked call, so this is not taken calls, this is not calls on the closers calendars, this is actual calls that the DM setters simply book in. So our cash per booked call in this case is 1,125 US dollars. And then our average conversation value, so ACV, average conversation value, in this case is also very healthy, being 108 US dollars. So what this means is for every single qualified call that we book here, 890, we made $1,125 in cash collected, pure upfront cash collected. This is not revenue, this is not recurring cash, this is just upfront cash on those 890 calls. What the data tells us is for every call that we book, we make about 1.1K in cash, which is pretty cool. And then our average conversation value, this basically tracks from the total amount of new conversations that we have, which in this case, 9,234, so almost 10,000. We made $108 for every single one of those conversations. Again, regardless of whether the lead was qualified or not, regardless of whether the lead booked in a call or ghosted, it doesn't matter. For every single conversation that we had, be it an inbound DM or an outbound response from when we outbound to the followers, we made $108 for every single one of those conversations. So now that we have the data, let me break down the actual lessons that I've gathered from reviewing those almost 10,000 DMs. So the first lesson here is breaking down and explaining the business opportunity. The issue with most setters is they treat DMs like a straight line. And they would ask a couple of questions that are not very relevant to the actual conversation or what the prospect actually wants, and then they would rush into booking a call. And I get it, they want to be efficient and they want to book a call as fast as possible so they can move on to the next one and do the same thing over and over and over again. But the thing is, when you do this, the lead has no idea how you can actually help them, and oftentimes they might be interested in, considering you're doing some sort of B2C coaching program or B2C offer, they might be interested in the actual thing that you're selling, but they don't fully understand how it works yet. They don't understand the unique mechanism or the method behind how you actually deliver results for your clients. And if they don't understand that before booking in a call, they will feel like they're being forced by the DM setter to go on a call. So they either say no, or because they feel forced, they book the call, but then they don't actually show, which hurts your show rate. And when I looked at the data, the setters that actually took time in the middle of the conversation to break down the client's business model booked calls at a significantly higher rate than the rest of the setters that didn't do it. And the way we do this breakdown here is through a voice note. And this voice note is going to be anywhere between 60 to 90 seconds long. It's going to be pre-recorded, so you just record it once and then you use it forever. And what you do in here is you just explain the process. So you don't pitch, you don't mention a course, you don't mention an investment, none of that stuff. You just explain the actual thing that you're doing. The goal of this and what you want to accomplish here is you just want the lead to feel like they're getting value from the conversation. All you want to do here is literally just explain and nothing else. The more educational you can make this, the better it's going to perform. So the goal of this is just to educate them and nothing else. And the byproduct of structuring it this way is sales resistance massively goes down, because here's what typically happens in a conversation for the duration of a conversation. So here you have sales resistance. And then when you reach out and then when you start having a conversation, the issue that most people have is sales resistance is massively gonna spike because people are just gonna be resistant. There's a million other people messaging them on a daily basis. So if when you reach out to them, their sales resistance is already high, what you wanna do as soon as possible in the conversation is lower that resistance. So when you actually send the explanation voice note, what ends up happening is because now they get value in the conversation, sales resistance is massively gonna drop. And then when sales resistance drops, what ends up happening is the person is that much more likely to continue the conversation with you. So by the time you wanna propose a call, the sales resistance is low instead of being high, which again increases the chances of that person actually booking in and going to a call and showing up to the call and then becoming a client. Now there's 3 rules for every single voice note breakdown that you need to follow religiously. So those rules are going to be the following: 60 to 90 second duration. That's number 1. Number 2 is you actually explain the thing, right? So you explain / educate here. This needs to be the number 1 focus that you have in a voice note. And then last but not least, you need to explain why it matters to them. So in this case, you can say, hey, you can use AI to do the work for you, or it takes like 2 hours a week, or whatever other unique / sales appealing feature your thing or your business opportunity might actually have for those people. And the way you apply this to a B2B service is, for example, instead of using AI, we're only taking 2 hours a week, it could be something along the lines of, hey, so you're no longer going to have to do sales calls, or you're no longer going to have to deal with operations. You don't really have to overthink it. Whatever offer you have, I promise you there's a use case for such a voice note, and it's tremendously going to help you in your conversations. So that's lesson number 1. That's the first thing. Getting the lead bought in and making them feel like they got value from you before you even get to booking the call. But even when you do everything right, some leads are still gonna go quiet. And most setters, where they go wrong is they think silence means rejection. But to me, silence means an opportunity to follow up and re-engage in that conversation with that person and remind them of why they reached out to us or why they followed or interacted with one of the posts or the content in the first place. So that brings me to the second lesson, which in this case is, you guessed it, follow-ups. If we just go back up and you take a look at the split between new conversations and total follow-ups, off the top of my head, you can probably tell here that we're doing about 5 follow-ups, so minimum of 5 follow-ups across every single conversation that we have, regardless of whether they resulted in a booked call or not. If you subtract the booked calls from this total new conversation number, we're probably going to be left with about 8,000. So 8,000 leads that didn't end up in a booked call. They got around 47,000 follow-ups. It's even higher, probably closer to a 6x or almost a 6x here on the amount of follow-ups that we do for every single person. So we're massively focused on follow-ups because it makes such a big difference. Because a significant chunk of those calls that we booked here came from follow-ups, came from the leads interacting a couple of times, having a little bit of a back and forth with the setters, but then ghosting us, and then the setters going in there and following up with them. Because what I realized when I looked at this is a lot of those calls that we booked came from conversations where we did more than 3 follow-ups. And oftentimes setters assume, again, because someone stops responding, that the interest is no longer there, but that is false. Those are busy people, those are busy professionals, they just forgot, people have low attention spans, and it's their job as DM setters to go in and aggressively follow up with those people and try and keep their attention and advance them through the conversation into a booked call. So all that being said, I'm going to show you the follow-up cadence that we run over not just the course of a week, but over the course of weeks and months on all of our client accounts. What's going to happen is the first thing that you want to do here is you want to do 5 to 7 follow-ups within the first 5 to 7 days. So when a lead goes quiet, we always follow up, typically every 24 hours or on a daily basis, at least 5 to 7 times, which is exactly what you're seeing here. This is a little bit over a week of data here, including teams that are ramped up and then teams that are on ramp up. So it kind of works out of that 5 to 7 average for those first 5 to 7 days. Now, after this first week of follow-ups, what you're going to do is you're still going to follow up 2 to 3 more times over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks. So this is going to be in the form of a weekly follow-up. Then if they're still quiet after that, the next thing that we do here is, you guessed it, we follow up again 2 to 3 follow-ups over the course of the next 1 to 2 months. And only after that, if they still don't respond, then you can consider that a dead lead that's no longer really worth pursuing. And when we draw the line here, you're going to see we do anywhere between 9 to 13 follow-ups for every single lead that we have in our DMs. And you might be thinking, well, George, I don't want to piss off my leads. I don't want to annoy them. And here's my thought process and my perspective when it comes to doing so many follow-ups. My perspective is that the lead engaged with you or followed your account because they have a specific problem that they're looking to solve. Something that you posted on your content resonated with them at a deep enough level where they took an effort to go and look at your profile, scroll through your content, decide that you are worth following, and that they could trust you to solve whatever problem it is they have. And in this case, if you're selling a B2C offer, it's achieving financial freedom, location freedom, time freedom, or whatever else it is that you're selling. So when you see it through this frame, if that lead took the time to engage with your content, follow your account, get back to your message and engage in a conversation with you because they had a specific problem that they're looking to solve, you'd be doing them a disservice by not following up and by not constantly being on top of them and keeping them accountable to what it is they actually want, which is change. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to doing a lot of follow-ups. For us, it's worked incredibly well over the past 4 years. I remember when I was personally a DM setter, I had a lead and I followed up with that guy. It was one of the first leads that I got in my first week as a DM setter. I followed up with him 42 times. 42 times I followed up with that guy over the course of 6 months. And after those 42 follow-ups, he paid in full. And I got my commission. 42 individual touch points, because the guy would get back to me and then ghost me for 2 weeks and then get back to me again and then ghost me for 2 weeks and get back to me again. And all I did was just constantly stay on top of him and create that top of mind awareness. And that's what helped me close the deal. And I carried that thought process and that principle with me in everything else that I did and all of the teams that I managed after that and all of the 70 plus DM setters that we manage right now across all of our clients. And the reason most setters don't do this is simply because they're lazy. It's not exciting. There's no dopamine hit from following up a 7th time with a person that didn't get back to you. But this is where the money is. I'm telling you, you want to go ahead and you want to do this because you will make more money. So if you have setters right now that are not hitting this KPI when it comes to follow-ups, you need to have a serious conversation with them and increase that KPI. All right, so now you have the lead bought in because you sent a voice note that provided value, that lowered sales resistance, you followed up to make the most out of every single lead, and you'd think that now they're ready to book. But there's one mistake that I see so many people do that just drives me insane, that completely kills conversion. And that brings me on to the third lesson that we're going to talk about in this video, which is manual booking. And this one truly drives me insane. Whenever I see it, we always switch away from it immediately. Because your setter has done everything right, they've done the conversation properly, they followed up, and now the lead is finally ready to book a call, but then the setter says, well, what time works for you? Or does so-and-so time on this day work for you? And now instead of booking the call, you've opened up an entirely separate conversation and back and forth that didn't even have to happen in the first place. Because now instead of booking the actual call, they're going back and forth trying to figure out a time and just doing admin work. Because let's play this out here. So the setter says, well, can you do Tuesday at so-and-so time? And then the lead is going to be like, oh no, I can't, but I can do Wednesday at 4. Do you guys have Wednesday at 4 open? Then the setter says, well, no, we don't actually have Wednesday at 4, but we can do Wednesday at 6. And the lead says, no, because at that time I'm taking my kid to practice, so I can only do before 4 p.m. And then the setter says, well, we can actually do Thursday at 3 p.m. Does that work? And then the lead finally says, well, let me check my schedule and get back to you. And then that's it. They never get back to you. And the call never happens. And all of this is because you created an additional 4 to 5 back and forths that never even had to happen in the first place. Because here's how I think about DMs, and I haven't seen anyone else talk about this. So DMs, unlike phone setting, where when you do phone setting, it's a straight line. Like the lead picks up the phone and then they turn into a call. And then typically there's no drop off. Because once someone picked up the phone, you can be pretty sure that they're not just gonna hang up on you. So your phone setter is gonna be able to take them from a pickup all the way to at least qualifying the person and proposing a call. But with DM setting, it's different. This is where a lot of people go wrong when they think about DM setting and why they still want to do manual bookings. DM setting is a downwards ladder, and every single step in the DM process causes drop-off. So if you have 1,000 leads to begin with, then the next thing that you do, and every step here is a back and forth, right? It's you asking a question, the lead responding, you asking a question, the lead responding. This is what every single step here does. So if you have 1,000 leads, then you might only get 800, then you might only get 600, and then you might only get 400, then you might only get 200 at the next one, and then you might get 100, let's say, calls booked, if you do what I just teach you with a 10% conversation to call proposal booking ratio. And this looks like a pretty decent flow between people ghosting and then you qualifying and making sure they're bought in and making sure they have the right amount of finances or they're in the right financial situation for them to actually be able to afford whatever it is that you're selling. But this is where people go wrong. Instead of booking those 100 calls and getting those bookings, instead of doing this, they would continue and they'd be like, hey, can you do Tuesday? And then the lead is going to say no. And then people are going to drop off. And then it's like, how about Wednesday? And then people are going to drop off again. And then people are going to drop off again and again and again. And then instead of booking your 100 calls, you've wasted so many of your leads that were ready to book a call. And by the time you figured out logistics, you've already wasted 70 to 90% of your leads here that were ready to book a call to begin with, because you just don't understand this simple concept of a downwards ladder. Every single back and forth in the DMs is an opportunity for leads to ghost you. So why would you give them that opportunity during the most important step of the conversation, which is actually booking the call? All of this to say, the lesson here is always use a booking link, period. We always do this. We don't have a single account right now where we don't use a booking link. In my 4 years doing this, I haven't seen a single person that we work with, and we work with a lot of people, and we send millions of DMs. We booked hundreds of thousands of sales calls for those people. I've never seen a DM funnel or a DM process that converts better with manual bookings compared to sending an actual booking. So if your team is still doing manual bookings, you need to stop that immediately. Just switch to a Calendly, switch to a Typeform. You're going to instantly see better conversion. So those are the 3 things that the almost 10,000 conversations exposed. The voice note breakdown of your method, business opportunity, unique mechanism, whatever you want to call it, the optimal follow-up cadence, and then last but not least, sending a booking link and not doing manual bookings, and really just understanding that DMs is a downwards ladder, and every single back and forth that you have is an opportunity for leads to ghost you. And the key here with having the most efficient DM process in place is being able to get all the information that you need from that prospect as far as getting them bought into the thing that you're doing, and then understanding their current situation, their desired situation, financially qualifying them, so you see the least amount of drop off and the highest throughput when it comes to booked calls and deals closed. Now, these 3 things are definitely going to improve your conversions, but they're only going to work if your overall DM process is solid. So if you want to see the full system behind how we generate conversations, how we convert them, the actual framework that we use, what happens after we book a call, and what sort of resources we send to those people to make sure they show up. 70-something% show rate here, 70.5% show rate. They close at a 26% close rate. Then click the video on the screen, because that's where I break down our $500,000 a month DM setting funnel.